Mystical Musings Podcast.
Welcome back to another episode of Mystical Musings. It's good to be back with you. I'm Brenton.
And I'm Rachelle. Yeah, glad that we can reconnect around this. And today I feel like we have really mystical musings. Like I have the inspiration to work with kind of a bunch of seemingly disparate topics, but I think they will weave their way together through this conversation. We'll see.
Famous last words.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. So a couple of things. I'll just kind of name them so we can kind of track where we're going here. One is that we're in kind of this late summer and getting ready to transition into fall. So earth into water element and a change of seasons. And there's a lot of like juicy kind of material in terms of our own well-being to work with there. And you and I talked about also just kind of having a conversation and doing some reflection on healing in general. And we talked about, the benefits of energy healing, and energy healing can be really useful during periods of transition. And this end of summer period is not something that's identified and well known, but is a really good time to work with that. So those are a couple of things. And then that relates to this bigger field that I've been sitting on for a long time, which is this idea of healing sovereignty and the intersectionality of healing. So got a lot of ground to cover today.
Totally.
Yeah.
So maybe let's start with, if you would, tell me a little bit about healing sovereignty and the intersection of healing. I want to hear more about what that means for you, because those are some big words that I don't always use, and I'm sure other people don't too.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I'll start with the intersectionality of healing. So in sort of critical race theory and social justice world, intersectionality of oppression is something that has been a big thing. And it's looking at, like, if we have one person, what are the intersections of society, of culture that impact their life? Race, socioeconomic status, trauma history, family upbringing, cultural values, those types of things, and how they intersect to impact the client's well-being. And I thought about, like, flipping that on its head well, I mean, I said it as it's related to the well-being, but in critical race theory and social justice, it's focused on the intersectionality of how it negatively impacts a person. And I thought about, like, well, what if we flipped it on its head and looked at how different types of intersections could positively influence somebody? So it's like how connected they are in community, how connected they are to the origins of their cultural roots and the healing components of that. What kind of support do they have? How are their practices integrated into their lives? What kind of space do they need? How are they getting support from their workplace and from their family and from their community? So that's kind of a quick and dirty description of how I've been thinking about it. Does that make sense?
Totally, it does. It's very similar to a lot of this, not only the conversations that you and I have had with what we're trying to create with Creative Spirit Collaborative, but also just what makes for healing in a whole individual. I mean, there's a reason that phrases like it takes a village to raise not just a child, but a freaking adult too, because we need not only community, whether that's community of non-physical energy or other humans, but we need to recognize that, like, not all the answers are inside and between our ears, but then also that it's okay to draw upon, multiple perspectives to get into that place where we're trying to get. The same way is not just always going to work. Yeah,
I like that idea of multiple perspectives. And I think that that's something in sort of typical American society or culture, if you want to call it that, it gets missed. It's not about multiple perspectives. And I was recently at this workshop / retreat around social justice issues. And one of the things that really struck me, we were doing a grieving ritual, and they were talking about how every person is meant to, and this was a specific kind of village perspective, but how every person, every baby that is meant to have 40 sets of eyes, 40 sets of adoring eyes on it at its birth and throughout its life. I mean, can you even imagine? No, most people don't have that in this sort of, kind of quote unquote civilized culture, and it's something like that. And then there's a couple of other pieces of like, can you imagine having a grandmother, growing up with a grandmother who knows the exact place to go in the forest to get the medicine that you need for this particular ailment? Can you imagine living in a community where everybody knows how to grow their own food and tend to the garden, and you have, multiple generations of elders that if a drought comes, they've lived through it and they know what the best practices are. These are the kind of, different perspectives that we're talking about. And we're also talking about like animism, seeing everything as alive and having a kinship relationship with those things, right? And even being able to talk with energies and ancestors, and there's so many perspectives that we don't get that are healing.
Gosh, yeah. In listening to you talk about this, I'm struck by how when we explore these ideas of intersectionality, what seems to be revealed is the deep interconnectedness that exists with us and everything around us.
Totally.
Yeah. And that's necessary for health and healing, because it's not like healing is just this one-time thing where it's like, oh, I did this today and now the rest of my days are going to be light and carefree.
Totally. Yeah, and we're given this message in, Western medical system, like you go to the doctor, you take a pill, and then you get better. And it's like, oh, that's so reductionist, And this kind of leads us to this idea around healing sovereignty. And I like that you said interconnectivity. I think intersectionality and interconnectivity in terms of wellness and healing can be somewhat interchangeable. And this idea of healing sovereignty is reclaiming our power to heal ourselves and our power to access healing through non-mechanized, non-reductionist, non-capitalist ways. We don't have to go to a doctor who's in an insurance system, who's in a system of medication. We can recognize that we are born in this web, and that is what's healing, not going to, a square box that's 72 degrees 24/7 that has white coats walking around all the time, right? But
sterile lights, no nature.
Yeah, right. And the healing sovereignty is really recognizing it's also not, I guess I should say, there's been a good positive push around fitness and health and wellness, right? And that's also not really what I'm talking about. It's not that kitschy capitalist, you should do this is what's good for you lifestyle change. It's more of an internal process of recognizing I feel inspired to do what is healing for me, and it's different for everybody. There are not specific set of rules that say this is what's right.
Gosh, yeah, there's the thing about that is society right now has been so driven toward consumerism and convenience. And so it's much more convenient to just take some ibuprofen and then let the tension in my head that was caused by tension in my shoulders, that was caused by stress, just kind of dissipate and put a Band-Aid on it. And allopathic medicine is kind of like that. I mean, you and I both have backgrounds there. So it's sneaky that we live in this time right now where we're having to be reminded that actually the real kind of work that you're talking about is slow, it's subtle, it's quiet, it's internal. To bring up some holy scripture, it's like in the book of Matthew, Jesus talks about how don't pray like the pagans do, who go out in the centers of town and they scream at the top of their lungs. He's like, go in quiet. be quiet, be by yourself, because that's where God hears you, basically. And, Jesus is not the only enlightened master to say that. Lao Tzu talks about that. The Buddha talks about, it's like, this is just kind of prevalent because our ancestors, humans, we were designed to be intricately connected with the world around us, but that's a subtle experience. It's a quiet experience. And we can't do that if we are constantly pulled outside of ourselves through the ways that society does. What makes me think about this is, I've hated commercials since I was a child. I've always disliked them. And every now and then, Tori and I'll be watching something and a commercial will come on. And I've noticed how with capitalism, because you brought that up, and I think it's a really powerful thing to explore the ways that capitalism has infiltrated healing in a deep personal way.
Yeah.
Because so many of the companies, especially in the United States right now, they invent problems so that they can market solutions to them. And I don't think that our health and the way that we approach healthcare in this country is dissimilar, including mental health, right? Yeah. Where so much of these problems that we have are, they wouldn't be there if we would stop and slow down and we were more interconnected with community, with our own sense of sovereign healing and our capacity to do so, right? Mm-hmm. So all this is to say, it's like, what does it mean to kind of tap back into these slow, subtle ways of being and to learn to even connect with myself like that if I've either never experienced them or am at the mercy of so much of the inertia of society and all of the stuff around me. Like what do you think? How does somebody kind of move into these new ways of thinking?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And before I answer that, I just want to appreciate this, like the slow and the subtlety, and how important that is. And capitalism is built on like loud, fast, disorienting kind of messages. And so, and also to dissuade us from doing that, right? You can't necessarily make money off of somebody going to the park. So that's an important piece, to just acknowledge. And also to say, just on the flip side, this is not about bashing Western medicine. It really isn't. It may sound like it is, but there's actually some things that Western medicine are really great for. Like if you get in a car accident and you need surgery or you need your bones set, great, do that. There are some real benefits to civilized Western medicine. It's just not the end all be all. And that's kind of the point that I'm looking at. And it's also not, so many people like in our society put all this authority on like this high medical figure. And then we lose that connection with ourselves. And I think to answer your question, what are the ways that we tap back in? I think in those moments, oftentimes people will have a lot of symptoms come up before bed. And it's like really going in and listening. What is the body saying? As if the body has wisdom. There's pain there, there's anxiety there, there's whatever it is. And really tenderly, compassionately listening to like, what's needed? What's true for me? Not what my work tells me I got to work another 10 hours today, or not what, the medicine says, like, go get this drug, or, not what the commercials say of like, go get some ice cream or something like that. That may be great. But it's like, what actually like opens my heart around that? Like, what do I long for? That's one way to start to tap into it. And to practice too, just being really sweet and tender and listening. Listening is a really great skill. And then for me, also being nature is another way. It's like all of the other stuff starts to drop away, and we are nature. So not only do I listen to nature outside, but I can really start to listen to myself as nature, and knowing that there's this sort of like innate healing rhythm within that.
Absolutely. Yeah, when I'm in nature, I feel much more embodied. I feel more present outside of my head and into other parts of me. And I think that's something that I hear you kind of talking about, because when we get locked into allopathic medicine, we kind of get locked into head dictated answers. Mm-hmm. And what I hear you talking about is an invitation to really sink into my body and to listen with more than just my ears and my head, to listen to what does my heart say, what does my stomach say, what does my nervous system say.
Yeah.
And I mean, it makes me think about, I mean, I've been on this healing journey with my digestion and my stomach and my intestines. And, if I continue to listen to Western medicine and even some of my doctors, I would still be taking medicine on the daily. I would be, working with symptoms that are there with an unknown cause.
Yeah.
Right? But what happened is instead I started listening to my body and asking, well, if there was a cause to this that, I could potentially do something about, like, what is it, body? What are you feeling? And then to discover that I actually have food allergies that are messing up my system when, that wasn't really something doctors were really looking at. They were instead looking at, how can I treat these symptoms to make it better so you can keep living the same lifestyle you were before?
Mm-hmm.
And so people just take medicine for that. And again, right, not to bash medicine, because there's times where medicine is not only life-saving, but it's necessary and important.
Yeah.
And also, it's not always necessary, because sometimes, like, lifestyle changes are what cause appropriate healing and changes, but we have to, like, listen to more than just our heads and what we think we should be doing for that to kind of rise to the surface.
Yeah.
So in other words, can I trust my own sense of what is going on with me and my capacity to heal?
Totally. And that's the healing sovereignty, right? We get a lot of messages where it's like, I've worked with chronic illness and pain for quite a while, and I've literally had people tell me, like, there's no sensation in your digestive organs. Like, what are you talking about?
Lies.
So it's like, relearning, like, oh, there is wisdom here in every person. There is, and I really like that piece around, I said listen, and I'm glad you made that distinction. It's not just listening to external sounds like the five senses, right? It's listening from the heart, listening to the energy of your body, listening to the rhythm of the emotions. So it's a deeper process, and then it slowly builds. I think there's also giving yourself the grace to trust yourself. I think that's really, really important. Trust is a natural part of healing, and then we can step more into healing sovereignty. If we actually believe, like, oh, there's something here. I do know what's going on with me. I do have a sense of it. So to say that, and then that kind of takes us into the seasonal rhythm, right? Which is like, how does your body, how does your mind respond to late summer? It is harvest season, but it's also a season where all the vegetation is dying and transitioning into more of an inert state. What does that feel like in your body? I know for me, late summer is a really difficult time. So it's like, what do I need? And our systems aren't made to breathe and flex and flow with the rhythms of the moon or the seasons. And that's part of that healing sovereignty, is saying, like, oh, I actually need to make some accommodations for myself here. And maybe you have more in that transition. There's certainly the fall piece too. So,
yeah, there's so much to what you're talking about, and it's crazy how much I don't think about how often capitalism has influenced and infiltrated so many aspects of being a human today, at least in the West, because it's so interesting to think about really the ties between the way that we operate on a daily basis. And how many 100 years ago, like before, or maybe thousands, I don't really know, I'm not a historian, but before, like, physical time, right, clock time, it's like clock time has only existed how many hundreds of years, and then we had time before that it was different. It was, I'll meet you tomorrow about midday, right? And so there was this spaciousness that existed there. And nowadays it's like, it's how much by when, how much by when, how much by when. And it's no wonder we think that health and healing and sovereignty should be the same way. I need to be this much by this, and if not, there's a failure, right? Or whatever. Yeah. And so, it's, to say that another way, it's completely unfair and unrealistic to expect that we're going to feel the same way in August that we do in February.
Yeah.
it's outrageous, but we operate that way.
Right. There's not almost 0% of businesses change their business hours, for example, even in the wintertime, right? And in the Pacific Northwest in particular, daylight is a lot less in the winter and a lot more in the summer. Why don't we make those rhythmic changes? Our bodies function differently. The earth functions differently. Why don't businesses function differently? And that's an important piece, I think, with this healing sovereignty. And it does require a kind of like, I don't know, like a reconciliation with it. Healing sovereignty is more about like looking at all the parts of our lives and how we are inspired to work with our inner healer. Whereas, if we're just kind of tipping into that, or we're in kind of some alternative forms of wellness or health, it's usually oriented towards how can I get me back to functioning in the system as it is. And the healing sovereignty is like, I need to actually change the system that I'm working in as part of my healing process.
Gosh, that's so powerful. Yeah, you're talking about the difference between like a Theraflu commercial and like going to a retreat. It's just like, it's so different. And I know I talk about this all the time, but like that returning to that kind of lifestyle of our ancestors, to the degree that we can today, because we can't just like drop 2,000-year-old ways of living in today's society. It doesn't work, but we can take steps. And, I'm thinking about just Chinese medicine and the ways that, they recognized thousands of years ago that there's a flow in the seasons that matches a flow of energy in our body. And, we talked about digestion, ironically, and right now, late summer is that time of earth energy in Chinese medicine where we're focusing on stomach and spleen energy. Yeah. And I mean, imagine if like at the national level, right, we had like diet and nutritional initiatives where from late July to the end of September, like there was this national effort to eat more in alignment with the earth element and take care of our stomach and our spleen. It's like, what a world that would be. Because most of us don't realize that like in our bodies, our stomach and our hearts actually send more communication to our brains than our brains do to our heart and our stomach. Mm-hmm. So we have this illusion of control that it's this top-down society, but the truth is that's a lie. Even our bodies are it's radiant kind of being, but we think it's hierarchical, and it's not that way.
Right. And rational and linear, we just miss so many pieces. And even what you just said there, late summer and transitions, right, are this earth element, which in Chinese medicine is the stomach and the spleen. Well, how interesting is that it happens to correlate with harvest season, right? And we're looking at our immunity at like, the spleen is really a big part of the immune system, right? And we need to bulk that up when conditions are harder, right? At the end of a season, heat, things dying back, a lot of labor to harvest and that kind of thing. So it's really interesting that those are synchronistic. I mean, it's like these are the rhythms that we're missing out on that we just don't know. And that's the healing sovereignty, is like continually exposing ourselves to like, there's something more here.
Absolutely. And to kind of bring us full circle, to bring up the intersectionality of healing part, for me, it's been coming to be aware of the ways that non-Western medicine practices are healing for me. And the number one way that I do that is by being immersed in the natural world or being connected with it. And it doesn't mean that you have to like renounce everything and become a hermit and live in the woods, right? Something as simple as following the moon phases for a few months is incredibly insightful. Spending, 10 minutes a day with your feet bare on the ground, those are the kind of things that help us to kind of get outside of ourselves to see so much kind of interconnected flow that exists on this planet, of which we're an important part. And society would like to believe us, have us believe that we're kind of separate and above everything else.
That's right.
We're deeply enmeshed in it.
Yeah. And Yeah, I'm glad you said that. And I'm just now, realizing that we could just go so deep with this, because what you said made me think of the elements, right? And it's like, oh, here's another piece of healing sovereignty. Tune into the internal balance or imbalance of the elements within you. And where are you called when we're in this fire season? What do you need? Maybe fire is like the greatest thing for you. There's not like, it's just different for everybody. For me, an abundance of external fire, I need all the water I can get, right? And so that's what I have to tune into in order to start to recognize and trust my own process. But if I go to a doctor, they're not going to tell me that. And in acupuncture, and Chinese medicine, there's some of that there, but it is also kind of removed from nature, oddly enough, in some ways. So I guess, kind of going back to the intersectionality and the sovereignty, it's seeing the ways in which we are just so connected with our environment around us, and the moon phases and the seasons, and all of it. We can't have this sort of human power top-down approach and feel like we're going to heal on all the levels, which is like, physical, mental, emotional, energetic, spiritual. That's another piece to it. We could go on and on and on.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of landing for me in this way, that I guess the epidemic that I see more and more is that people and we mentioned this, people don't trust their own capacity to know themselves. It's easier for me to be told by somebody else what's going to work for me. But like you keep saying, nothing that everybody else did is going to work for each of us, because we're each so incredibly unique that we really are only here to walk our own unique path. And the irony is, the more that we do that, the more connected we're going to be.
Mm-hmm. And more empowered and more, what's the right word? Vibrant, maybe, is the right word. Or filled with our own integrity, our own resources. Yeah.
Shining your own light.
Yeah.
The Gita talks about that. Krishna says to Arjuna that it's better to, basically spend one day, or no, the Buddha says it's better to spend one day in full light of the Dharma than to spend 1,000 yugas without it. So 1,000 lifetimes, it's better to spend a single day being who you are meant to be.
That's powerful. Yeah. Because all the messaging we get is kind of contrary to that. And I think it creates so much pain and confusion and then trickle down effect, anger, and, all of those different things. I think about, the mental health system, and, doctors and therapists, all well-meaning, really want to help, but just on a singular level, the mental health system as a whole in the Western world is focused on individual problems. You have depression, there's a problem with you, and we're going to give you the tools to fix it. There's no looking at, like, what is your intergenerational trauma for the last couple hundred years? There's no looking at how you are separated from your own innate healing and wisdom and knowledge because your culture was cut off a couple hundred years ago. There's no looking at, like, how separate, how dissociated are we from knowing our own, natural environments. I mean, there's so many layers to it. And it's like, I often, when I, see people in the office, I'm like, this depression is not yours, at least not exclusively, right? There are so many other layers that the general Western mental health field doesn't even consider on the whole, right?
Totally.
And that's pretty harmful, actually. People carry a lot of weight because of that.
Yeah, we were talking about this in our yoga group. This is ahimsa, right? There's so much harm rather than non-harm in our society.
Yeah.
So to kind of bring us to a close here then, what might you suggest for somebody who is either new to this, kind of exploring like really what it means to claim my power to be an individual that's interconnected and is awake to the sovereignty of my own healing.
Mm-hmm.
How might you start?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I think it's similar to what I said before. It's like, for me, it's in nature and really listening from the heart. But another way to say it is like, if you can, I often will talk with people around preferences, like people that don't have any choices or visions or don't know what way to go. And this is true for healing sovereignty too. Like looking at, what inclinations do you have? I have an inclination to go to the coast versus to the mountains. I have an inclination to food is a little bit, it gets co-opted a lot, so that's a little bit more challenging. I have an inclination to rest or to push through, so there's just the small little subtle ways that you can really start to honor your needs, your impulses, and tracking them and seeing like, oh, I wanted to eat a cheeseburger 3 times a day. Is that actually true for me? How does my body respond to that? Oh, that's something that's been co-opted. What the truth is I would actually like to feel well in my body. And cheeseburgers, my mind likes cheeseburgers a lot. Really like cheeseburgers because cheeseburgers blunt the effect of all of this input, right? So, yeah, I think I can't underline the necessity of listening deeply to yourself, trusting, and starting there, and getting support too around people that maybe are a couple steps further in this and have some ideas about how can kind of help you tune into yourself. Meditation is good for that. Meditation instruction is helpful for that. Embodiment practices can also be good. Like if you have no frame of reference at all, you can start with some embodiment practices, breathing or a little bit of yoga, or just like moving your body, stretching and seeing like what's there actually. Those are my thoughts. I'm curious if you have any ideas about how to kind of touch into something like this.
I think I just want to add to what you already said, because I really like everything that you mentioned. And it's that sometimes if I'm not used to, and I know this is true for me, when I wasn't used to listening to my body, I really wasn't sure what that meant or how to do it. Mm-hmm. And I found that sometimes something as simple as either placing my hands somewhere on my body, to like help bring my attention there, like we'll do it on my belly, for example, and then to literally ask myself sometimes out loud, what does my belly want right now? What does my belly need? What is the wisdom that my belly has to offer right now about this cheeseburger, about my depression, about this thing that I'm worried about or have anxiety about, whatever. What do my feet have to say about this? If my knees had advice for me about this situation, what would their advice be? Mm-hmm. Just so that I can kind of get out of this idea that I am a head who is in a body, directing my body to go do things. Mm-hmm. You know, just to kind of break that top-down approach. To throw out a reference, there's a man named Philip Shepard who wrote a book called Radical Wholeness, and he does a lot of embodied present work, and his practices were really helpful for me in learning to kind of get out of my head and realize that I can listen with every part of my body, not just my ears.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful. Thanks for sharing that. I think that's really important because a lot of times we're duped. We think we're going into the body, and it's actually the mind sending messages down, masquerading as the body. I see that a lot in somatic sessions, so I'm glad that you named that. Just familiarizing yourself of like, what is my heart saying? Is that actually my heart? Let me feel it a little bit more. So good.
Totally.